Because this is such a great setting where there aren't, we could get a good conversation going here too. Given all these interesting, smart people in the room, you'll have your own smart questions. So I do want to leave a lot of time for that at the end, because as Nikita said, this is such an important conversation to be happening at this moment in time. So why don't we start with everybody introducing yourselves, giving a greater sense of, what your work has been so far, and then take us to your news organization, or in the case of Louise, she goes around to various news organizations, and she can speak to the Wall Street Journal also to describe these uses that we've been seeing before we get into culture and that sort of thing. And Anita's actually prepared a presentation for us about her work. So why don't we start with you then? Yeah, absolutely. Just because you can give a better sense of the many things that you've been doing in your career that have led you to here. Let us know a little bit more about you, and then also the uses.
Sounds good. Hi, everybody. Great to be here. My name is Anita Li. I am, like Kate said, the founder, CEO, publisher, editor-in-chief. This tends to happen when you run an independent outlet. You do all the things. Of The Green Line, which is a hyper-local independent news outlet that's community-driven and solutions-focused. We launched in April 2022, so it hasn't been that long since we've been in existence for the past 2 years. Our tagline is that we investigate the way we live to help young and other underserved Torontonians survive and thrive in a rapidly changing city. At some point, I'm going to be talking about how AI really integrates with my very human-centered, community engagement-driven model, and really focus in on how it really supports smaller independent newsrooms that are low capacity, low resource. My background is that I started off in legacy Canadian media. I worked at places like the Toronto Star, the Globe and Mail, the CBC. I went through the traditional kind of pipeline that you do as a young journalist in this country. And then the latter half of my career was largely with New York-based media outlets. So I worked at this publication called Mashable, which was a tech-focused publication, Fusion Media, and then also Complex Media. I was a news director there. And I eventually pivoted to community-driven media. So I worked at a place called The Discourse, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, which fills in gaps in coverage in underserved communities. So a lot of my experience culminated in creating this entrepreneurial, initiative and endeavor. Kate also mentioned that I'm the innovator in residence at Toronto Metropolitan University. So my approach to innovation is actually a lot more pragmatic. I really care about the fundamentals of journalism. I really care about democracy. So that's really the vantage point you'll be getting my perspective from.
Oh, you can if you like start some of
Oh, okay. That's great.
Why don't you get right into some of the uses? Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. So hopefully people can see. So like I mentioned, this is our tagline. We're really about, in some ways, we're really old school in that we really care about being a public service. As a journalism outlet, but we do that through trying to encourage the members of the public to take action on the issues they care most about. And this is effectively our model. So this is our action journey that we're best known for. So I just want to set the stage and then talk about the use case around AI in a second. By saying that in a given month, we tackle one systemic issue facing the city. So across 4 weeks, we publish an explainer, some sort of in-depth feature, and we host an event where we convene community members to discuss solutions, the problems as well as the solutions to the problem or the systemic issue. And then in week 4, we publish an article that crowdsources the feedback and the solutions that emerge from the event, and we reflect those solutions back to members of the public so they can take action on them. And in fact, actually, kind of a teaser, I'm actually working with Google's product team right now because I see a lot of potential in automating elements of this model. So that's something that's, happy to talk about after the fact that I'm pretty excited about. So I want to talk about how we're using AI, and this is actually a really good kind of entry point for folks who are less familiar because, like I mentioned, I wasn't one of those people who, breathlessly embraced AI. I was somebody who was much more pragmatic about its usage and felt like, okay, this is something that I obviously absolutely have to need to know. And as a responsible educator, it's something that I felt like my students really also needed to know how to use responsibly. Some of this stuff is ChatGPT. In some ways, it's like revealing my diary because it's moderately embarrassing. As you guys can see, I don't only care about page views, but there's basically, I'll talk through this. So at the very fundamental, I'm sure many of you guys have played around with ChatGPT. I use this platform as kind of a headline brainstorming partner. And because I have a team of about 10 people, vast majority, all of whom are actually part-time staff or freelancers, I can't always pull somebody out when they're, working on an hourly basis to do some headline brainstorming with me. So this is actually a really great fundamental usage of generative AI in terms of having just a brainstorm partner. To me, I kind of like, it's like talking to somebody and using it in kind of at the first, it's kind of a crude way. Like, I obviously know I care about quality journalism and it's about engagement and serving the public. I also want it to have attraction. So it's really kind of starting at a high level of like how, at a high level, what, in this case, it was a story that we were doing, a hyper-local story about a neighborhood in Willowdale about a nonprofit that is a fashion nonprofit that supports newcomers, essentially. So I wanted it to pop, essentially. So you can see just the process of me talking back and forth to ChatGPT. And eventually, what I want to highlight is that I didn't actually end up using, and very rarely do I end up taking the headline that ChatGPT suggests. I use it as kind of a way to brainstorm and generate my creative juices and eventually land on something that I think makes sense and resonates. So that's obviously a very fundamental use case. And this is the article that ended up, or the headline that I ended up choosing. Another thing that I use AI for at the Green Line is writing posts to support original video journalism. We really focus on events as a journalistic output, as well as videos, because we partner with City News Toronto. So a lot of our coverage is video-based. And so this was an engagement video where we talked to folks in Woburn, which is a neighborhood in Scarborough, about just their experience living in this particular neighborhood. And we also what we wanted to do is actually create a post that supported this video journalism. So it wasn't actually journalism itself, it was just something that you throw on the website. It's web copy that accompanies the video that some of you may be familiar with or often have done. And so I didn't want to waste the time of a reporter to actually write this thing when they could be doing original enterprise journalism. So what I ended up doing was actually taking the transcript of the video and then popping it into this tool called OneClick. It's actually a really cool BIPOC-led business, an AI-focused business by a young Canadian woman in her 20s, who's really, really cool person. And I've been testing this out. It's in beta currently. And so what it does essentially is it can take any sort of video transcript and churn out, a template for a blog post, a newsletter, a title, headline, summary. And I took that component and then I put it in ChatGPT to try to get something that was, and I directed ChatGPT to essentially give me something that was maybe a 200-word, 300-word summary of the video that would complement the video that I could put in the web copy. So it was me using multiple tools. It's not like I only use ChatGPT. I also use Cloud AI as well as this Click.io tool in addition to others to put together something that normally might take an hour of a reporter's time, and it took 15 minutes to do. And it didn't take in fact, it enabled my journalists to do more enterprise journalism rather than waste their time doing something that wasn't really anything but accompanying copy. The other thing is that this is what it looks like on the website. At the bottom on the right-hand corner, you'll see an editor's note where I write, the video in this post was produced entirely by humans. This post accompanying the video is written with the support of AI and edited by a human. Contact us at the Green Line to hello@greenline.to to learn more. So that's my way of being transparent with the audience so they know, this is something that was used with the support or created with the support of AI. And that's really important, obviously. I need to be extremely transparent because there is a lot of public, reticence around AI. And obviously declining trust in journalism, and so it wouldn't be great if somebody found out that this was AI created without me being transparent about it in the first place. And then finally, the last thing I want to mention is the best use of AI that I have at the Green Line is actually business development related. So I'll say off the top that this grant that I applied for I created in 4 hours, and I ended up getting $50,000 for it. It would have normally taken me 40 hours to do this. And I also extend this to other things like, awards applications. Like, these are things that CBC has an entire team for, and I don't. It takes I wear many hats. My time is literally money, and so I cannot be spending time on aspects of the business that are not fundamental to it, like the journalism. I need to spend the most time on the journalism. So I worked with my partner on this, a nonprofit community center called Scatting Court, to basically draft up a bunch of brainstorming notes that we did in maybe an hour or two. I don't have the ChatGPT kind of transcript for this anymore, but essentially the end product was this document. Obviously, you don't write like act as an applicant for a grant and write an entire grant that's like 4,000 words. You have to chunk it up into different sections. So I was very methodical about it. It's still entirely, obviously, our original ideas, our original work. It's really, we use ChatGPT as a writing tool. And grants are not meant to be, they're very oftentimes tedious and repetitive. And so what we did was we just looked at the different questions that were in the grant. And then I methodically got ChatGPT to generate entries for different sections of the grant. And then we ended up putting it in the slide deck, and took elements of the ChatGPT text and submitted it, and then we ended up getting the grant. So that was a really fantastic use of my time, and my partner was flabbergasted at how quickly I could put this grant together. And so I'll just conclude by saying, I think as an independent community-based outlet, I see a lot of positive potential for AI in terms of giving more capacity and resources. And I really feel like a lot of there's been an explosion of media outlets, local independent news outlets in the last 10 years, which I'm very excited about, that are filling gaps in coverage, that are really supporting democracy at a local level. So to me, like, this could be really a boon for local media and provide, maybe generate a renaissance. Or support the renaissance that's already flourishing. So thank you so much for listening. And I think we can talk about this later on.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
but thank you so much.
Okay, great. Thank you, Anita. So Nafid, why don't you give us a bit of a sense of the work you've been doing too, a lot of data work over the last 10 years, but give us a glance behind the scenes of the Globe that we as a reader just don't realize exactly how much is automated on the website and some of the different things that you've been up to here in this building.
Thank you. Anita, that was...
Yep.
Sorry. Thank you very much. Anita, that was very impressive. I don't have such an impressive background, but as you have heard, I have worked at the Globe for a decade, but I grew up with newspapers, and I was working for large national daily newspapers back in Southeast Asia before migrating here. And then when I came here, one thing I promised myself, I'm never going to work for a newspaper ever again. But, it's in my blood because I like journalism so much. And what we do is really supporting journalism. And that's how we take the AI theme and the path that we have taken here at the Globe almost a decade ago is to support our customers, our readers, and our journalists. So many of you know, like, I have a long title, but anything data related, I take care of the Globe and Mail, and data science, our AI practice falls under that. But it's not just one team. It's a combination of what we do as a news organization, starting from the newsroom. So our journey started about a decade ago when we started to form a data team. This is when Globe first introduced online subscriptions back in 2012. We started to put a data team together because we needed to make sense of the data and this new world that we were stepping into, which is online subscriptions. And what we started to do was do data analysis for the newsroom to make sense of what was working, what wasn't working, because page views were not what we were chasing anymore. So it was a very interesting cultural shift that needed to happen. And I thank the people in the newsroom. There were champions who were working with us to make that shift. So we started really analyzing and presenting it to the newsroom, and that's exactly what we did. And one of the key components that we were trying to solve back in those days was promotional bias. And guess what? Like, it changed over time because it was distributed omni-channel. Everybody was coming from Google, and guess what? Social media. Where is social media now for news organizations? It's gone, right? So we are back into that era where promotional bias, your homepage becomes your destination, the direct relationship you're building with your customers. It's so important. And that's what we tried to solve with this tool that we created for the newsroom. It was an analytics tool that looked at, what you were producing, were you overproducing or underproducing? Did it really drive the value that your news organization is trying to do? And that was that mix of your subscription revenue to your whatever the customers were looking for. And what we ended up doing was, obviously that was really a big success with the newsroom. And then what we try to do is to see if we can use some predictive capabilities. And this is not 18 months ago. This is about a decade ago when we were trying to understand, can we use data to see if we can understand how a news is going to perform before it even hits the market or if it's out there. And we were looking at some early success, and we were basically informing the newsroom, and I have some colleagues here, Rebecca and Patrick, and we were trying to understand from them if we recommended something, that this is a good news story, do something smart with it, would the newsroom react to that? And they would give us feedback. They would say, oh yes, I'm going to promote this now because of this. I'm not going to do it because of these reasons. And we fed that information back to the system, and that gave us a really good confidence to keep, teaching the model to become better at it. And then our idea was to help the newsroom in saving time, right? And Anita, you talked about capacity. Everything that you showed us today was about saving time. And so what we wanted to do is to see if there are things that we could do that would save newsroom more time. And our editor-in-chief is like, at some point when we were really good at it, he was like saying, oh, our newsroom is basically looking at the recommendations and moving boxes on the homepage and section pages. So why don't you guys do it? And our idea was to not outperform humans, but to do equally a better job. And we did it, and to a point that it was really embraced by the newsroom, and they were doing other things. It was not to replace anybody's job, right? And that's still the fundamental motto we have today. So from that, we went on creating more paywall technologies. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with a company that was born in the newsroom called Sophie. And we created a few different products. One of them was a dynamic paywall that could basically look at what we said we were using for the other tool, content propensity, as well as a human propensity side of things. Like maybe a content is a great piece of content, but it's somebody's not ready to pay for it. And why should we then bother that person multiple times to make them pay? So it was a great success, and we still use it. Sophie is no longer part of the Globe. We've found a new home for it. But we are still using it as a client, and we are very much involved in sort of further development of that. So fast forward about a decade into where we are today, with this wave of Gen AI, whether you call it a hype curve or whatever you want to call it. So we did exactly what, Charlie, you were talking about, which is, coming up with policies and guidelines, because this could be dangerous as a news organization. We care about copyright. So we made sure and there was a note to the newsroom, there was a note to our readers. We wanted to make sure that we have a pretty good stand in how ethically we are going to use AI. And if we even do it, we are going to inform the readers. So then, what I try to do is to sort of form a cross-functional group and make sure that everybody in the organization was at the table to really understand, like, how can we really look at this in a cautiously optimistic way to be able to really benefit from it. And we knew that not everything that we are hearing, there was a bit of a hype curve. There was this fear of missing out kind of mentality that is still out there. So we wanted to be real, and we wanted to make sure that we get the proper use cases in a list and then group them into sort of 5 categories. So what we did was we said, okay, what is it that this piece of technology can do to support newsroom in creating content. And that could be assistive in nature to journalists, like saving time, as you said, brainstorming ideas, like I'm going to interview somebody, can I brainstorm 10 questions that this AI can give me? Or it could be, assisting in creating, as you said, like a headline or a summary or a blurb or maybe a draft story. So these are some of the sort of themes that would fall into that category. The second category was, what is it that we can do for our customers? And it really then talked about, and this is where you're walking into dangerous territories, because these are public-facing things. Unless they're properly moderated or you really have good confidence in what the output of these things are, you're not necessarily going to put that in front of, customers. And examples there could be things like, personalization at scale. It could be things like chatbot. It could be assistant to the customers, just like assistant to the journalists. The third option was like, okay, except for the newsroom, are there any operational efficiencies that we can think about within the company? Right? There are other departments, our advertising team, we have a revenue team, we have finance, we have operations. Can we make sure that there is operational efficiency in every single aspect of the company, that they can really use this technology? Then we looked at two other things, which was, how can we use insights? Because we are very data-driven as a newsroom, as a company, and we wanted to make sure that, AI can really help us interpret data faster so that we can really take that back into every single aspect of what we do, whether it's journalism, whether it's, supporting the customer in different ways. And last but not the least is obviously revenue, right? Like you have to really think about how this technology can help with the revenue, whether it's sales or marketing or whatever. So those were the 5 pillars where we have sort of, grouped everything. And right now we are sort of in the process, and we have created more like a roadmap. We wanted to do rapid testing and development. So we want to make sure that not everything's going to work out, but we are partnering with the newsroom. We are partnering with our UX team and product team to make sure that whatever we are going to try to rapidly test and develop, we want to make sure that it is actually doing what we thought it would do. And if it does, then scale it. If it doesn't, then,
Such a period of experimentation,
Yes,
and getting
absolutely.
those two teams to work together and to know what each other needs and to try things out.
Absolutely.
And I don't even know that many readers would know. Sophie, for instance, I didn't know that, 97% of the page is just automatically laid out, and a human only chooses 3 stories or something like that. You see what I mean? I guess it's
Yeah.
just the powers of that. Instead of manually
Yeah.
laying each story, what should go in what order in my lineup, it's happening because you did all of that data insight. Troy, I should turn to you. Associated Press has been even generating sports and earnings stories, I think, for a decade now, automatically. Yes. What other things? Where would you say we're at right now with AP and the key things that you've been trying out in terms of using these tools across the various outlets that you serve?
Yeah, and as you mentioned, we were doing generated text a decade ago with kind of an older form of natural language generation, right? The difference between what we were doing then and what we're trying to do now is that technology was still fairly deterministic, right? It was logic-based. You could put up a template and kind of if else, then, and if it made a mistake, I could go in, examine the template, figure out where the problem was, right, and fix it. And if I have the same input to that template, it's always going to have the same output. The tools we're dealing with now with generative AI, they're not deterministic, right? They're probabilistic. We don't know. If we put the same input in, we could get a different output out. And if it makes a mistake, Charlie, I think, was talking about the black box effect. We can't go in and examine, like, what's the logic? Why did you can ask it. You can go, hey, ChatGPT, you messed that up. Why? It'll tell you. That could be a lie too, right? It's not a bug. That's a feature. It's just supposed to make stuff up. It's supposed to predict stuff, right? So that was very different. So our approach has been different as well. But I think we learned a lot from our experience in creating those earnings reports. The idea there was very similar to what you're all talking about. It was about capacity, right? Earnings season would come around, and our business reporters would just have to slog through these things and just crank out these earnings reports. And we still couldn't cover all of them, right? And so by automating that, we were able to say, okay, we can fill that void. We can create all of that content. But you can take those business reporters and they can say, I want to focus on a few that are really interesting and really go in depth. And they're doing things that are only humans can do, like real, what we think of as real journalism. And so I think that was a benefit. And so we're looking for those kinds of opportunities, how we can really help the journalists. We're all stretched. Every newsroom is stretched too thin. Every journalist is stretched too thin, right? How do we use those resources to do things only people can do? But now we're dealing with a technology that we can't really introspect that way, that we can't predict what's going to come out of it necessarily. And so we're taking a very cautious approach with it. But we're trying to look at ways that it can affect everything we do. And I think we have to accept that it's going to affect every aspect of our lives to some extent. Someone was saying earlier it's going to affect every beat, and I think that's absolutely true. So one way to look at it, I think Charlie used this framework earlier that we use all the time at AP, which is kind of looking at news gathering, news production, news distribution, right? And I kind of think about that as kind of one side of the matrix, and the other, they're kind of three loose buckets. One is versioning. Like, how do we take our journalism, start with the human journalist, into the human editor, and in the middle, can we create more useful versions of things to serve different audiences? Versioning is one of the things that we're looking at. Another is that we're looking at sifting the signal from the noise. And this is really important for news gathering, right? So we have huge volumes of data, huge volumes of documents. How do we help create pointers to what's interesting and newsworthy in that large mass of data? And that's incredibly powerful. And the third is really looking at critique, analysis, that kind of interactive experience you have with these chatbots. Are there ways that there are some great ideas about, can we ask it, what is the bias in this story? What are the other angles we should pursue? If we want to do a follow to this story, what kinds of sources are we using here? So ways that we can be critical of our own processes and of our own content. So kind of taking those ideas across news gathering, news production, news distribution, you end up with endless possibilities for how we can use this technology. We're starting, with any kind of technology adoption, I think it's important to start with someplace you're comfortable, someplace where there is enough, there's a significant enough pain point that people are willing to take a chance, right? So by just talking to people across the organization, in the newsroom, in products, in revenue, in technology, where are our pain points? Where can this be useful? And starting there, and starting with business as usual. How can we be more efficient? How can we do the things we already know we want to do? So we're doing the things that everyone is doing, right? We're doing translations. We have a pilot running right now with Spanish language translations. Interestingly enough, we're using OpenAI for this, GPT-4, which that's not something that model was supposed to do, right?
This is from Spanish, I think.
We're going from English to Spanish. That's where the pilot is running now. But if you think about it, there are specific translation models out there. These next word prediction large language models, I wouldn't have guessed 2 years ago that they'd be really good at translation. Turns out they can be pretty good at translation if there's enough of the target language in their training data. There's a lot of Spanish language, apparently, in OpenAI's training data. So we're doing that. We're looking at headlines, and we're looking specifically at, can we prompt it to give us specific kinds of headlines, curiosity gap headline, an engaging, informative headline. So trying to kind of guide it for the kinds of headlines that we want. And then, as Anita pointed out, we don't expect that these headlines are going to be the ones that are actually used. We expect that they are going to give reporters and editors ideas for better headlines and get to those ideas for better headlines faster. And one of the things I find about these models is often they're wrong in interesting ways. And that can be super useful, right? A lot of times I'll say, hey, write up a paragraph for this business report I have to do. And I think, well, that's garbage. But if I change this, that, and the other thing, it's something I really want to use. And it's made me think about the problem differently, right? And I think that's kind of what we're looking at with headlines. With translations, it's about speed. We have translation editors who were kind of splitting their time between translating and then editing one another's translations. And so now we're able to kind of make some of them focus on editing the machine-generated translations. But we don't trust those translations to go out to our customers or to readers, right? There's still that editor there, the human in the loop, looking at it, making sure it meets AP standards and style, making sure that it's accurate, all the things that an editor does. That value is still there. And I don't foresee anytime soon a world where we would allow generative content to go directly out. So translations, headlines, summarization. This is something, like if you ask data scientists, summarization is a solved problem in data science, right? Throw a big article at it, it'll give you a summary, confidently, sometimes wrongly, but it can do this. It summarizes things very, very well. We have an interesting case where our summaries are often used by broadcasters, and they're very specific requirements for what a broadcast summary should look like. So specific that it's challenging for our editors when it's the last thing they're doing. They're trying to file the story. They got to get a headline. They got to get it filed, and now they got to write a summary. So can we give them a head up, kind of a foot up on that, right? Can we say, here's a draft of that summary. It's going to meet all of these requirements for broadcast. Now, the editor is going to make sure that it accurately represents the story, it provides the relevant context, all of the important things to make that summary useful, but it will take some of the repetitive work out of the way. Those are kind of the main things. And then we're doing, I think, out of the things that Nikita mentioned, the 20 things, I think we are experimenting with 15 of those right now. So across the enterprise, we're trying lots of things. And we really want to foster, at the same time, a spirit of experimentation and also maintenance of rigorous standards, right? And balancing those two things. It's a bit of a tight wire act, to be honest, but I think it's absolutely essential.
This is great, and I've liked seeing all of the experiments AP's been doing too with grants from the Knight Foundation, that sort of thing, how to serve local needs, et cetera, right? All of this culture of experimentation, but also working across silos. I should turn to Louise. Louise, can you just give us a bit of a sense of your background? But I know that you see all sorts of news organizations. Is there something that really sticks out that's been a game changer for you that you think everybody should know about?
Sure. Yeah, I do see a lot of organizations in the consulting work I do. And then at the Wall Street Journal, in 2018 to 2021, we did quite a number of different deployments of earlier AI. Actually, someone on my team, Francesco Marconi, who was at the Associated Press before that, we worked together to do a lot there. And the way that I'm talking with companies about AI, there's a couple areas. I like the categories that you've listed, but I'm talking with them about a few things. So first of all, you all know the news industry has engagement and trust issues, right? And so one of the things I think is important to keep in mind as we look at AI is not just how do we use AI to do what we're already doing and maybe do it faster, do it cheaper, but how can we use it to do new things, and can it help with online engagement, and perhaps trust in other ways. And so in terms of online engagement, these are really thinking about new products, types of story formats. I'm very hot on versioning. I think it's really exciting that you're experimenting with that at the AP, and some companies I'm working with are also doing some early experiments. We did very basic level of versioning at the Wall Street Journal around college ranking stories. I think that that's a really good nexus where we could see making content more relevant to individual people and potentially having online engagement go up. On the trust piece, I'll come back. One other point I want to make. In addition to the engagement and trust problems, the other big thing I try to remind organizations to do is to go to the roots of what we're doing in journalism, and don't forget that. And one of the most important things in journalism, and I've spent most of my career leading reporting teams and reporting as well as doing technology, so I'm very focused on the info, is one of the most important things we do is get new information. Mm-hmm. And it's so important. A lot of what we've seen the most in the past 15, 20 years in the whole data and digital transformation has been technology coming in and news organizations redeploying people to essentially repackage a lot of things and recirculate things that are out there. And I think it's essential for the public and for the business of journalism for people to remember that what has value in terms of our public mission, but also ultimately economic value, is new information. So for news organizations to think about AI both to help find new information. So for example, finding the signal and the noise, that's finding new information, and you can use it in investigations that way and so on. But then also to free up people, there's stories you can automate, free up people. But when you free up people by, using AI in production, go deploy those people to do more reporting. Get them out in the field. Don't just, make it faster to write the stories and get rid of them. We need people finding new information, and that comes in the human touch. And just to circle back to my trust point, I think that we are partly in a news crisis around the world because we don't have as many reporters in the field in front of people. You don't see reporters out at an event. People don't meet reporters. And so this is a moment in our industry where it's possible, by really effectively using AI, to also get people going out in person, getting information, being seen, that will lead to new information and more trust in our community. So that would be my big picture.
That's something that you care about, right, Anita, in terms of like the local scene? Because we all know there are local news deserts across the United States, across Canada, and we're trying to cover all these. Well, we're not covering the school board meetings all that often. We're not making it to every council meeting. How do you feel that these tools or the trends that are happening right now might have an effect on local news?
Absolutely. So I just was nodding vigorously at what you were saying, Louise, because I know you can't see me. But Toronto's an oversaturated media market, but it's actually there's news donuts is what we call them. So effectively, shout out to April Lindgren, who does a lot of cool research on local news deserts. But essentially, like, a lot of what the Green Line does is fill in gaps in these neighborhoods, in these communities that are really underserved by existing media. And underserved does not inherently mean marginalized, by the way. It just means it's not well served by existing media. And so I feel so strongly about co-signing what Louise said, because I do feel like one of the best things we do, especially since we do video journalism with City, is that we go out into the field and people get FaceTime with us. And it's kind of a slow build. It's kind of the opposite of the early 2010s, like breathless, like Web 2.0, like rise of venture-backed like media outlets that I was part of, because it's kind of like slowly rebuilding trust. And so the more I have, one person on my team, like I mentioned, like kind of supporting doing web copy, or just supporting doing like things that don't require the mind of a journalist, like enterprise journalism, going out and meeting people, regaining the trust of the public. The more we have capacity to actually deploy those journalists to do great journalism, and that's been a boon for my publication. We've been recognized for both our video journalism, our digital journalism, and our news product itself through awards, and we're also profitable. So I think I don't know if it would have been possible for me to bootstrap my own outlet and not have major funders and become profitable in a year or two without the support of a lot of tools, including AI. So, I don't think it's a blue sky thing, but
it's certainly a bright spot.
Yeah.
This is great to hear.
Yeah, exactly. But if you're responsible, then that's great.
Can you just give me the quick anecdote, Troy, actually, about what we were discussing earlier about the ability of AI to try to take stock of all of these meetings, et cetera, on YouTube, because it's just so important in democracy to keep tabs on those who need to be held to account? You had a great example about that.
Yeah, I think there are a few folks working on this problem right now. Going back a couple of years ago now, we worked with Stanford, big local news at Stanford, and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, because AJC was saying there were outlying areas that are part of their coverage area, and they used to have someone in every one of those meetings, and now they don't have the staff for it. So how do you cover those meetings? And so this was an earlier version of technology. But the question was, can we take the agendas from those meetings? And so Stanford Big Local has a project called Agenda Watch that's about scraping agendas and making them keyword searchable, or getting alerts from that. So it was the collaboration among the journalists at AJC who knew what was newsworthy in those things, Stanford Big Local that had the pipes, and then we hired some developers to actually build out the scrapers for those sites. So that was an early version of this, but now I think what you're referring to is we have a project, one of the 5 local AI news projects that 2 folks who are on my team now, but weren't when they did this, the local news AI initiative that AP did with a grant from the Knight Foundation. They had 5 projects. One of which was the Minutes Project with Michigan Radio, which was about getting city council minutes summarized. Another one was about summarizing videos, right? And it was about taking short videos and can you create a quick summarization and bullet point analysis of those videos. We took that technology and then we repurposed it. So, for example, we had some reporters who had to listen to a lot of podcasts. And so there was hours and hours of podcasts, most of which wasn't necessarily interesting. But every once in a while, something's going to bubble up, that you need to know about. So Ernest Kuhn, I should say their names, Ernest Kuhn and Amy Reinhardt, who led that project and are now on my team. Ernest took some of that technology that he'd been working with those local news projects and used it to summarize those podcasts. And we're also seeing this useful for school board meetings, summarizing school board meetings and city council meetings, and think about all the different meetings that are now, since COVID, available on YouTube. And you can get a summarization, you can get bullet points, you can get keyword detection. You can start to look at what's bubbling up across the country from a local level. I think that's really, really powerful, and it's becoming accessible to everyone now.
And so important, too, because all those local news trends funnel up into the national discussion, right?
Absolutely.
Could I just have your quick summarization here, Nafid, about... We were discussing a lot about where we are right this moment, but can you just give us the timeline of what you think that we're in right now? Because this moment that we're in and all the tools we're discussing, we're not sure how long that lasts.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, I guess, it's so, I was smiling at when you were describing that use case because we experimented with exactly a similar use case. Zara here is a data scientist. We were working on a very similar kind of prototyping. So what I think is, Anita, Kate, you're going back to your question, is that I was at a conference recently, which was joined by almost 600 news people from all around the world. And one of the things that was obviously the biggest highlight was generative AI and how AI is transforming the industry. What people were talking about was that we are probably in this age right now, which is a efficiency phase. And this will probably be lasting between 0 to, let's say, 24 months, where we are thinking that existing tasks and processes and products will be the same, and how can we get more efficient with those things? Next is what they're calling a transformation age, which will be probably another 3-year horizon, between 2 to 5 years, where new products and services are going to start to come up, and these will be built based on the foundation of generative AI or AI in general, and that's going to change how we do things today. After that, mostly 5+ years horizon, it's going to be a new information age. We don't know anything about that yet, but fundamentally how people consume news, how we produce news, how news gets to people, everything might change in the next 5+ years. So we have to be really fluid in what we are trying to do. We cannot just put all bets in one basket and say that this is it, this is what's going to work. So we have to be in that mentality where you're constantly innovating, trying out new things, because this is not going to stay where we are today. It's going to change very fast. Somebody was saying GPT-4, you talked about GPT-4 and it's doing translation. Somebody who got a little bit of a preview of GPT-5, it is exponentially better than what GPT-4 can do. So we are talking about hallucinations, yes. Those things will be a thing of the past very soon. These things are going to get better and better because they're using large language models to train large language models, and they're getting better and better and better.
I bet everybody is starting to have questions for the panelists because we've got a lot that we've already discussed, but I just want to finally turn to Louise, because if we are thinking about a different future, and journalism doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? Our audiences are consuming news differently. We have young people who are experiencing news in a way that is different from even I was experiencing it or am. What do you see, Louise, in terms of being audience focused in how we use these tools and the trends that we're seeing? And how storytelling formats might change, et cetera, or what we might have to, the way in which we might have to think in the future?
Well, the number one thing I'm working on with some of my consulting clients, which are all news companies, is their data storage and their data cleanup, because actually it's essential to really know your user base. And there's a lot of trends happening right now, not just AI. You know, we also have the phasing out of cookies at the same time. We also have a shift in revenues to being more of a subscription and community event revenue lines in companies versus just advertising. So there's a lot of reasons why it's really important to know your audience. And so in terms of being audience focused, what I would say is that I even have gone into some companies and they're saying, let's invest, you know, lots of money in this AI team. And I say, no, wait a minute, you need more money in your data team. And it's all connected, but that's the first ground layer. So I would say, as we look ahead to being really audience focused, I would say really good data practices, data engineering, moving to real-time data capture and being able to in real time deploy it to change your product experience reactively is very important. And actually, surprisingly, there's many top news outlets that don't have that can't do that necessarily because they can't ingest as much data that quickly. So I would focus on that. And then I would also focus on, beyond data capture, the relationships that your news organization is building with their subscribers or their members. So not only are events, for example, a good revenue line for some places, beyond events, just open, you know, not hidden data capture necessarily, which, you know, also is helpful to know your user, but open communication with audiences about here's what we're doing, give us feedback, you know, along the lines of participating, whatever is appropriate for news organizations. So you have really clear relationships with audiences is what you need, so that as we are transforming, you as a news organization are transforming hand in hand with your audiences. So those would be the areas that I think you can be focusing on. And then whatever is going to happen in user taste, and they will change. You know, people are saying, you know, people will just want answers, their questions, and there will be other ways we don't know. But if you are doing good data capture, data analysis, and also openly communicating with your audiences who you know consider themselves a partner, then you're going to be able to evolve with them with that.
That's great advice. Thank you. I will mention, just before I turn it over for some questions, that on our call together, we did discuss briefly about who knows how long we will keep using the 800-word inverted pyramid. Are we going towards personalization, where people can get a different story depending on how in-depth they already know the topic, if they're new to it, and that some of these tools will allow for that, which is a little bit uncomfortable and mind-blowing, but you know, there are all these different story formats, personalization, versioning that is available to us now, and we're doing in some capacity. So I'll just put that on the table too, but I really do want to make this a discussion. So I imagine people have some questions, and let's talk about it, because like I say, this is a great forum for this. Let's have this discussion. April? Or I guess you'll need a microphone.
Yeah, can you guys share among yourselves, and I'll take one of these. Thank you.
Hi. This is a question for AP and these summaries that are being circulated about meeting minutes and stuff. Is anybody actually looking at them? Do you have any way of tracking that? Because my observations with trying to help out local media is nobody has any time to do anything. So unless you hand them the story, in most cases it's, yeah, okay, it's nice, it's there, but we don't have time to look at it.
Yeah, I think one of the things one of the interesting problems in all this to me is identifying newsworthiness, which, you know, as Charlie was saying earlier, that seems is pretty intuitive for people in newsrooms. Oh, that's newsworthy, right? What does newsworthiness mean? How do you tune these models to detect newsworthiness? And how do you then have an output that gives that reporter a head start? We were distributing data. I was leading the data journalism team. We were distributing data sets, right? And we tried this, a pilot in Brazil, where we're going to give it away for free, just to see if people would pick it up. And so we're giving away all these data sets, and we're getting no pickup. And then we started using this older natural language generation technology, generating localized leads for the story, and generating a little story that someone could pick up and run with. And adoption went off the charts. How do you make it look like news? How do you make it make sense that we know this is something our audience is going to want, and this is something I can use right now? So I think part of that is with the tooling that's being created for some of these outlets, the how much the user can define what newsworthiness is. Can I help define this is a story that I'm going to write? And second, and we're working with a startup right now on kind of a news tip service idea that we're really thinking about how we get at this as close to a story as possible without encouraging people just to publish this thing automatically, right? And that's really the issue to my mind. We want something that is going to be a head start, but there's this concept of automation bias, right? Where we just assume the machine's right. We start to just accept what it's going to tell us. And I think we all kind of can fall into that, and we stop thinking critically about what the output of the machine is. And we want to maintain that critical analysis. So can I give you something that's almost a story, with the context you need, with the links you need to go and fact check it, so that you are using this for language generation and not knowledge generation, and still make it fast enough that it's useful. Like, that's the balancing act for some of these things. So customization, personalization are going to be key, so that it's news to you, it's news that you want to use, and then formatting in a way that it does give you that head start. So some of these tools are developing those capacities now.
I just throw in that the BBC has done a bit of work like this where they actually create a news package to go with the data. It says, here's a possible lead, here's some expert interviews you can pull from this content. Anyway, it's just, I find that the challenge of getting newsrooms to pay attention because of their resource challenges is really problematic.
And also, I think another thing is, how do you integrate this into their workflows? How is it appearing where they're already working? And then that's going to be an interesting challenge as well. Like integrating this into CMSs, and so that you don't have to go someplace else and interrupt your workflow to get to it.
Other questions? Great. Let's just, thank you. It's just looking for Carleton colleagues to pass.
Thanks. It's like a relay race over here with the baton.
Thank you.
Hi, great conversation. Thanks. I'm Patrick Dole from the Globe and Mail. Troy, wondering how you found your translation tests go when it comes to capturing cultural nuance when you're going from English to Spanish?
Not great. That was the number one complaint we've had, is that idiomatic expressions, things that don't translate well. So the example that keeps coming up is hush money, right? Because of the Trump trial, like, how do you translate hush money? Because there was no direct translation for this, and the proper way to translate it was to just explain what it was, right? And the AI wasn't doing that. And so there are some techniques that we're trying. We're experimenting with new techniques to say, first identify all the idioms in English, and then check the translation and make sure that you are not translating those idioms literally. But there has to be something beyond that right now, that's what the human editor is doing. The editors are saying, yes, this is making it faster for us, but I have to go in and do these things. And that's why we need editors. And I think that's where we are with the technology now. At least that's where we are with our adoption, is that the human in the loop is absolutely essential for exactly those kinds of things.
Other questions?
Troy, I have another
great.
question if nobody else has one.
Sure.
Were you involved in AP's Visual Archive adoption of AI search?
That preceded my move into AI. So I kind of saw the tail end of that, and we're looking at, we're still working on that. We're still iterating on that. But yeah, so the two things that were in production first for us were transcriptions, automated transcriptions, and then adding AI-assisted visual search. And so those are two things that are in production now.
Yeah, I find the visual search very powerful on AP images.
Thank you. My question is, what do you foresee as the future? Because, and I know this is a hard question, but for my journalism students I teach at TMU, I talk about fact-checking being incredibly important for the future of journalism, because that is our role a lot of the time. But what you're talking about with editors, and this is what I have to go in and check, are we actually creating the jobs we want to do, or are we creating the jobs we have to do because AI can't do them now?
Who wants to take that one? And I don't know, Lou. Oh, sorry. Oh, Louise might have frozen. No, she froze, actually.
I'm here. No,
Okay.
I'm here.
Okay. Did you want to take that one?
Can she just repeat it again?
Okay.
I'm asking if we're creating the jobs we want to do in journalism, or just doing the jobs that is left over from AI. Like we're becoming the fact checkers of AI. That isn't what I got into journalism for. Or the editor who now has to check these 7 things, like the idioms. Is that what we got into journalism for? Like, are we creating jobs that we want, or are we creating the jobs that are left over after AI?
Yeah, that's a good question. And people get into journalism, as you know, for different reasons. It's kind of a joke within newsrooms, that some people are really reporters, but they're not writers. And then some people are amazing writers, but they don't like to report. So actually, the reasons people get into journalism vary. And some of the tasks of journalists can be done more by AI than others. It's also the case that not many people got into journalism really to focus heavily on the audience. People got into journalism, a lot of people, because they like the story, and they like, and so this has been a cultural transformation for many newsrooms to actually try to fall in love with the idea of serving and caring about audience interest, which may not be journalist interest. So that's not exactly an answer, but I think, the answer is depends who you talk to. If AI is going to take over the thing that got you into journalism, because different things got different people into journalism. But I think that, when you're talking about the leaders of organizations, that, as I said before, leaders of organizations reflect on the public good that journalism does, and just make sure that those are things that are happening. And I do think human line of inquiry, we've seen so much advanced stuff in production from AI, but the actual line of inquiry, like what question do I ask next? And also, how do I get that person sitting across from me to tell me that really sensitive thing that might get them fired, but they're going to trust me? Like, this is human. And that's something that as a journalist certainly motivates me, and I think a lot of people. So I think there'll be a lot of it left to do, and it's important to do.
Yeah. Oh, great. We've got another question back here. Thank you, Louise. That is why so many of us are in this, right, is to have that human connection and to work in the public good. Hi.
Hey there, Brad Fournette from the CBC. So I've been running AI experiments at the CBC for the past couple of years. And, the tools are great, and we've talked about a lot of them. One thing I learned really early on is journalists have a lot of questions. And one of those big questions are, okay, but what about my job? Nafid, I think you talked about it, where the idea is obviously my philosophy early on was like, yeah, it's going to be a great tool, and we're not going to replace your job. Not replacing jobs is so important. I'm wondering if anybody on the panel has maybe advice or experience on how to tackle that question, because it is a little bit of it might replace your job, to be honest, depending on what you do or how you use it or how quickly you adopt to it. Because if you're going to push against it, maybe, like social media was, right? So I'm just curious maybe if anybody has insights on that.
I can take a first pass at it. We went through this with our automated curation, as Kate mentioned. If there were individuals that were curating the website, and now they're only curating, let's say, 3 packages or 6 stories, and the rest is all done by AI. We have redeployed those resources to do something that they were not able to do because they were moving boxes on a site. So going back to sort of earlier question about why are we in journalism and we are becoming fact checkers, it's very important that, at the end of the day, the newsroom is the subject matter expert. I can create a tool, I can ask a developer to develop something, but unless we work with them to really understand how this is going to create efficiencies, it's very hard for us to create something that will really work. And it will only create efficiencies if they see that as something that is going to empower them rather than take their jobs away. So, yes, you're right. There could be news organizations who might think that, oh, okay, can I do with 5 less people in the newsroom? And that is where I think, the management needs to really think through how they're thinking about, using AI. If you have that mindset, maybe redeploy AI in your revenue stream or getting things done that would get you more revenue rather than thinking about cutting jobs. Where I think there could be efficiencies in terms of fact, like if you have, let's say, communities and you have a lot of comments that are coming your way, one use case could be that you're using AI to moderate comments, right? Are journalists doing that today? Maybe to some extent with the really important ones, but they're not necessarily sitting down and checking every single comment that is coming their way. So it's important to really understand what is it that you're trying to solve for, and making sure that, when we talk about AI ethics, I think it's not about ethical use in terms of, oh, I'm going to use AI in a sensible way where I'm not going to, steal somebody's work, or I'm going to, use it to infringe copyright or something like that. But it has to be fundamentally thought through from a humane perspective as well, that this is not intended to replace a person. So that is also something that you have to really think through as part of your AI strategy.
Anita had a thought on
No.
this.
I have a quick thought. So I teach students at TMU, and this question always comes up. And this is actually why I'm such a proponent of community engagement. And I know CBC has actually been doing some really cool stuff around consulting communities about the coverage they care about. So to me, like in a lot of ways, as this there's this AI explosion, there's also been an explosion of a lot more desire to be more embedded in communities and neighborhoods among people. So to me, that isn't, yes, there is like to your point, there's obviously going to be jobs that will be replaced, but I don't really see like the human connection element of our job going away. And so that's kind of how I excite a lot of students to stay and like motivate them to stay in journalism. Yes, maybe editors and fact checkers will become more prominent and in need, especially as AI becomes more integrated into newsrooms. But there's a lot, like I see so many positions that are emerging that are more audience focused, community engagement focused around newsrooms, in newsrooms around the world. And that's like a really also like another trend that's emerging, that's not stopping anytime soon.
Okay, great. We will get into a number of fraught questions on the ethics panel with my colleague Nairan after lunch, but I feel that we should just, with a minute each or so, why don't we end on a positive note and think about what is an area that you think would hold a lot of promise for journalism, that you're really excited about the opportunity, and then we can have some time to be able to chat over lunch in the next little bit too.
Yeah, for sure. So Troy mentioned something about AI covering like public meetings more efficiently, and I'm actually working with the Green Line's working with Concordia University to bring documenters over to Canada. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with documenters, but it's this really cool initiative out of City Bureau that basically trains members of the public to cover public meetings and fill in those gaps, because most City Hall reporters cover like the big meetings with the mayor present, but there's meetings that are topical and also like regional, right? So I have 8 youth journalists at my community newsroom in Alexandra Park that we are hopefully going to transition into becoming documenters that will attend these public meetings. And I actually think AI can, because they're not trained journalists in terms of writing, we can take the notes that they produce and insert them into some sort of template that AI can produce around like just, bullet point summaries of these meetings. Like they might not break news every time, but they're the kind of thing that, when you look outside in your city, like everything is impacted by municipal politics. And there's a lot of people in the dark about these meetings, and it might engage them also further to vote and to engage more civically in their communities. So obviously with the aid of somebody who's an editor as well, but I'm really excited about that initiative.
Great. Nafid?
I think, journalism is always challenged with many different challenges, especially here in Canada with C18, and social has no news anymore, right? And with search going into different directions, with generative search coming into the play, the whole ecosystem of how people consume news and how people get to you is going to change. And it's a tricky balance, because AI can really either help in that, space to make sure that you focus on distribution more, you use AI to build that direct connection with your audience, and you make your own, platforms really compelling enough for them to come back to you directly. But I'm optimistic about it. I think, this is where it's a make or a break situation, but I think, if used wisely and if used properly, it can really benefit journalism in general.
Excellent. Thanks. Troy?
And Kate, you mentioned earlier, the question about the 800-word inverted pyramid story going away. And I think that's one of the things I'm actually really excited about, how many reporters have had a story cut for length, right? Why should we serve up the same article to everyone when that was created for a specific medium because you had to print it and it had to be identical, right? So now, what if, and this is just imagining, everything that ends up on the cutting room floor has a new life? Because there are new audiences and there are new needs, and someone needs that nugget that was so important to you when you reported it, and your editor cut it. How could we make all of that available to meet our users, our audience needs more fully?
Oh, that's so interesting. Louise, what is a way that, or one thing that you think you're really excited about that AI might hold promise for our industry? Oh, did she? She did.
I think Louise.
Okay, I thought it was just our screen. Okay, oh, that's too bad, but that's okay. We have so much food for thought here. Thank you to our panelists.